Is it sabotage? Did Russia blow up its own pipeline to Europe? Did the United States blow up the pipeline? Did Ukraine do it? Is Tucker Carlson right? And what does this mean for the future of the Russia-Ukraine crisis, nukes? What's going on with the troops? Let's talk and summarize everything in a non-biased manner. Hey everyone, Meet Kevin here. Wow folks, first let me say, when I first posted a video on this topic, I deleted it within 3 minutes because I realized I needed to add even more context. So that's what we're going to do in this video to try to make sure we're addressing all sides. That's my goal. And if any of this stresses you out, remember you can get life insurance by going to metkevin.com/life, and in as little as 5 minutes, you can Apple Pay or Android Pay for life insurance. All right, so here's what we know. Let's talk about the facts, and then let's talk about the speculation, and then we'll talk about the facts again, okay? We'll go in that order. So first, here's what we know. The CIA specifically warned Germany about attacks on the Nordstream 1 and Nordstream 2 pipelines this summer, in June. So the US was already kind of like, hey, there could be some attacks on these pipelines, which sends this sort of implication that either they intercepted communications that suggested there could be attacks by Russia or Ukraine or otherwise, or they themselves were manufacturing these plans to attack these pipelines. We'll touch on that, including what Joe Biden said. The Nord Stream 2 pipeline carrying natural gas from Russia to Europe never officially opened because Russia invaded Ukraine and Europe instantly stopped supporting permits for the Nord Stream 2, even though the project had just come to completion. The Nord Stream 1, however, previously was pretty critical because it helped deliver the 40% of Europe's natural gas that it gets from Russia. So this is not like a small portion of natural gas for Europe that needs to be replaced. It's 40% of Europe's natural gas was coming from Russia. And the Nord Stream 1 was critical for that, and the Nord Stream 2 would have helped a lot, help bring the cost of natural gas down and be able to deliver more, even more efficiently. But even the Nord Stream 1 was shut down after the invasion started. And while it did temporarily reopen to a reduced capacity, somewhere at 15 to 25%, the pipeline was again closed at the start of September, which is just the beginning of this month, about 4 weeks ago. Now, both pipelines just got attacked. 3 explosions occurred. We believe those are explosions because a Swedish seismologist noticed the explosions occurred right before a drop in pressure in both pipelines, and then bubbling up leaks were discovered. You could Google some of the images of these leaks. They're pretty dramatic. You just see these big circles that almost look like hurricanes in the water of bubbled up water. That is not so important. What's more important, though, is that these explosions were obviously conducted by somebody. Somebody bombed these pipelines, and these pipelines aren't exactly easy to bomb because they're steel pipelines. They're as deep as 300 to 400 feet, reinforced steel pipelines, and it's likely that somebody would have required some form of sophisticated technology to not only locate the pipelines, which they are mapped, but to get to those pipelines and then bring some kind of explosive strong enough to burst those pipelines. It's not like we could just swim down there with a scuba tank and whack it a few times with a shovel and boom, there you go. No. On top of this, both of the fuel lines were primed, and it's likely that whoever attacked these lines knew that the fuel lines were primed, which means they were full of fuel. Which also means you can't just drive a submarine up right next to it because you're gonna be in the blast zone likely, unless of course you can fire a torpedo from further away. But these were European Union European Union waters. They're not international waters. So they're likely heavily surveilled regions, and a submarine shooting a torpedo from a distance would have likely been noticed by certainly the United States military, but you would also expect by, either the Swedes or Denmark or the European Union or NATO to some extent, because after all, that's our job, is to monitor when torpedoes start flying around, okay? Like, that seems odd. It seems more likely that somehow maybe a submarine was able to place an explosive or wrap an explosive around this pipeline and essentially sneak in and sneak out. Either a covert mission that was authorized from a European or United States or Ukrainian side or a Russian side. We'll talk more about the speculation around that. But anyway, as a result of these explosions, massive natural gas leaks occurred very rapidly, causing potentially the same pollution that would have otherwise been caused by 20 million vehicles conducting their average driving for about a year. That's a lot of pollution. And that didn't happen over the span of a year, like 20 million vehicles driving around. It happened in the span of a few hours. That's because of the massive methane leaks that came along this pipeline burst. And methane is 80 times more damaging to the environment than CO2, especially at these concentrations. So the question now is, okay, like, why would somebody do this? Like, this is crazy. Like, the pipelines were off. What's the benefit to doing this? Why would you sabotage and potentially damage your own infrastructure? If you're Russian, it's your infrastructure. If you're European, it's your infrastructure. Like, what the hell? Why would this happen? So I made a little diagram to try to think about this, and then I want to address the sort of the Tucker Carlson drama, and then we're going to talk a little bit about sort of my expectations around this. So first of all, why would Russia cut itself off? Well, Russia knows that the EU is done, okay? So let's start with that, okay? So at this point, Russia pretty much knows they're going to be getting replaced as an energy source. Like, nobody wants to rely on Russia anymore going forward because now we know that Russia is not a reliable partner. They're erratic. So for example, the CEO of Total Energies was on Bloomberg today and talked about exactly this. And he says, look, for right now, yes, the future is uncertain, but here is something we know with certainty. The game is over in Russia. It is not safe to invest in Russia. They say they would rather invest in oil exploration or natural gas exploration in the United States or Qatar. And they would rather provide liquefied natural gas, compressed natural gas via ship to Europe. He also says that right now, gas storage, natural gas storage in Europe is good. He says, in his opinion, Europe is fully stored and safe, that there's enough natural gas for heating for this winter. Obviously, it's going to probably depend on the severity of the winter, and the CEO did go as far as saying that, hey, we're not sure if we're going to be able to cover all of the electricity needs, but in terms of heating needs, we're good. So it doesn't sound like we're perfect here, but it does sound like we've been preparing for mitigating the risk of this winter. But what's fascinating is if we go back to this particular spreadsheet here, or this diagram, when we say something like, well, why would Russia, self-destruct? Why would Russia do this? Like, they would want to potentially turn this pipeline on again in the future. The odds of that are, in my opinion, extremely low, because after all, companies are already saying, no, you know what? We're going to either develop more nuclear power, we're going to have other sources, other supply chains essentially for natural gas, because we can't trust Russia anymore. So the idea that, well, Russia wouldn't self-destruct is actually very convenient for Russia, because people might initially think, oh, well, why would Russia self-destruct, without thinking about all of the additional facts that I just provided. And then somebody else could be blamed, even if Russia was the one who actually perpetrated this attack, especially with the comments Joe Biden made. I'm going to talk about Joe Biden's comments in a moment, and I have to say, they do raise an eyebrow a little bit. But then again, it's Joe Biden. So we'll see, okay? So my thoughts here is I wrote that the result of Russia attacking this pipeline would obviously be to escalate tensions, but it also has this interesting strategic point of view. It would put the security and military on high alert for NATO and Norway and Denmark, because this would essentially be an incursion into European waters. And now you do see countries like Norway and Denmark saying, okay, we're ramping up our security. So now militaries for these countries are focused on the Baltic Sea and maybe not so much on sending more weapons to Ukraine, right? Oh, let's beef up our security because we just potentially had a breach. So you do have the strategic advantage to where Russia potentially is going to be able to convince a lot of people to think that, well, Russia didn't do it. Why would we do that? That's crazy. The EU did this themselves to blame it on us. And Russia kind of gets a strategic advantage here potentially. And it also reiterates the sort of scorched earth approach of, mess with Russia, this is what you get, right? So you kind of have some interesting considerations here for, could it be Russia, right? Okay, now, could it be the United States or a European country? Well, I'm going to talk about these notes right after I play the Tucker Carlson clip, which is where he shows what Joe Biden says about, hey, like, how can you guarantee us that the Nordstream 2 won't be coming back online? And I have to say, when you watch it, it's kind of like, oh, yeah, that is a little suspicious. Okay, let's go ahead and play it, and then I'll come back with commentary.
In early February, less than 3 weeks before the war in Ukraine began, Joe Biden suggested on camera that he might take out these pipelines. Watch.
If Russia invades, that means tanks or troops crossing the border of Ukraine again. Then there will be no longer a Nord Stream 2. We will bring an end to it.
How will you do that exactly, since the project and control of the project is within Germany's control?
We will, I promise you, we'll be able to do it.
Notice how he phrased that. And he's the president, doesn't phrase things by accident, particularly when he's reading off cards. He didn't say, I will pause the delivery of gas from Russia to Germany. He said, there won't be a Nord Stream 2. We'll put an end to it. We'll take it out. We'll blow it up. How will you do this? He was asked. I promise you we will be able to do it. They thought this through. And yet those watching, very much including us, didn't take Biden seriously when he said it. This is the president who has declared climate change the most pressing emergency in the history of the world.
Okay, welcome back. So, obviously, this is heavily implicated that maybe the United States and Europe were in cahoots here, because remember, this is EU territory. There are suggestions on Twitter that people are looking at flight paths for U.S. military helicopter activity and stuff, and people are drawing all these connections that, it was almost certainly the United States and Europe. Look, ultimately, we probably won't know the answer to this. Biden's hints and smirks towards the end of what he said are, somewhat implicative, if that's a word. But I will say, this is quite a climate disaster. And if there's one pause I have with definitely blaming the United States and Europe, is that they really stand for the climate, certainly a lot more than I suspect that Putin does. And I think if it ever came out, which this stuff always ends up coming out, that the United States or Europe authorized this attack, the political careers of people who authorize this would absolutely be over if you create the worst natural gas leak in the world since the natural gas leak in Los Angeles at a gas station, not like a physical gas station, but a natural gas plant, where natural gas storage leaked over many months, right? This is the worst disaster in climate-related natural gas leaks since 2015. That's 7 years, okay? This was like political suicide. Unless they could come out and say, well, the climate impact actually isn't that bad. That's going to be a hard one to argue, though. So I think politically, it's extremely risky to suggest that the United States or Europe pulled this off. Does it make sense because it's in EU territory? Sure. But then again, that plays into the Russian hand that, well, of course, if Russia's going to do it, why not do it in EU territory? Sneak in at night and do it if you can pull it off. Maybe you got some kind of a radar blocking submarine or something that goes deep enough to where sonar's just not picking this thing up. Maybe that's the way it is. We don't know all the technology, right? But it kind of reiterates that, hey, if Russia could pull that off, that would be the place to do it, is on EU territory, because it raises the suspicion that it was the EU or is the inside job of the United States, an inside job of the United States, right? Especially with the CIA's hints earlier this year. And the U.S., in their foreign policy and three-letter organizations don't have the best of reputations right now. Then again, as we know, reputation is what other people think of you. Character is what is actually going on. And the reality is we don't know what's actually going on. We do obviously think that there's this potential that Ukraine could be involved here. They're not taking any of the natural gas. They'd potentially be eligible for traveling within EU territory in the Baltic waters without suspicion. However, they have a small navy. They've got a small coast guard. They've got dated equipment. Russia's taken many of the ships before even the invasion because Ukraine just really hasn't been capable of maintaining an actual standing navy. However, they've been getting billions of dollars from the United States and from Europe. And so I'm sure they could either take over a ship or a submarine and go do this sort of rogue mission, if you will. They've got plenty of firepower, weapons, they could pull it off. Ukraine would be probably the most obvious because it really would go to show that, look how erratic Russia is. What are they going to do next? And even though the finger's pointing at the United States or Europe, Ukraine seems like they would potentially benefit here because the United States or Europe will be like, well, crap, we didn't actually do it. Wow, Ukraine's right. They are erratic. Let's help Ukraine more, right? So the point is, all of this here is just speculation. Here's what we know. We know that Russia is trying to raise an army of another 1 million soldiers, but the Russian military-age men are leaving. We also know that Russia is deploying troops to the border of countries like Georgia to give people their notices and go, hey, you look like a military-age man. Looks like you're leaving. Here's your notice to serve. You don't come serve, you're getting arrested. You also know that Ukraine is asking European countries to stop accepting Russians and providing visas to Russian military-aged men, so that way, on behalf of Zelensky, the Russian-aged men are forced to stay within Russia and they can potentially dissent within their own country. Problem with this is some people are saying, why would you suggest that, Ukraine? Why not just let the Russian military-aged men leave Russia and then they're not available to fight you in Ukraine? It's exhausting. It's really stressful and exhausting. But I will tell you this. Here are the facts. The facts are this winter is going to be tough for Europe, and GDP will suffer because if the Nordstream pipelines came back on, we would be able to reduce inflation. Now, that's gone. The optimism that maybe natural gas contracts could fall this winter, very likely gone. We're now reliant on slow natural gas compressed deliveries via ship and building renewables. That all takes time. The future is very uncertain. And there's a reason natural gas contracts from Denmark are up 20% on the day. Natural gas more broadly and oil are back up again. Brent is back up to nearly $90. It had gone as low as like $84. And we're going right back up, okay? This is bad for inflationary issues. That's a fact. This is bad for inflation. Bloomberg economists believe it is a fact that GDP will fall by 4% in the euro area if we have rationing this winter. That's a huge decline in GDP. Yeah, we only need to be like negative like 0.5% to be in a recession. Negative 4% would be absolutely terrible. The next fact that comes up is, what about nukes? And this is less of a fact, it's more of the statement of what about nukes? Is Russia really this erratic to where maybe they could actually start using tactical nukes on the battlefield? Which haven't been used since Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but could happen. This would be terrible. This would be an unacceptable escalation, which the United States has told us would absolutely be met with a counterattack. We don't want to go there because then we're in a world war. Then China gets involved and it's a disaster. So the one fact of this number 2 issue here is that we know any kind of use of nukes would be a disaster. Hopefully we don't go there. And number 3, we know not only number 1 is GDP likely to decline. Number 2, we've got this uncertainty around nukes, but number 3, we got the inflation issue, which we've already talked about. So those are 3 dangers that we have that are not mitigated by this disaster that's going on. So I want to know from you, A, did you get your life insurance link down below? Did you join the courses on building your wealth linked down below with a coupon code expiring Friday? Did you join House Hack? And what do you think? Who's at fault? Is it Europe? Is it the United States? Is it Russia? Is it Ukraine? Who done it? Let me know. Comments down below.